So as I said, today's session is going to go on private pre-shared keys. We're going to be looking at what are they, how are they used, how do you configure them. As I said at the beginning, I've actually, in the notes, I've actually provided within this a detailed configuration guide on step-by-step for the lab that I'll be doing. I'm hoping to talk for about half an hour and then spend about half an hour doing a lab and actually walking step-by-step how you will create a private pre-shared key, how to set it up. And we'll set up 3 different private pre-shared keys on a single SSID and show you what they are. So the first question is, what are private pre-shared keys? And to answer that question first, I'm just going to look briefly at some of the other options we have in the network for securing users as they come on. And you're probably all familiar with WPA2 Personal. You probably at least use it in your home network. We do hope you don't use it in Office, but I can tell you 90% of companies that I go into, of networks that I go into, have at least one pre-shared key configured at some point in their network, and they use it. And it's very common. Of course, a couple of issues with that is, first of all, it is susceptible to dictionary attacks. Is one problem with personal pre-shared keys or with pre-shared keys in general. The WPA2 pre-shared key does have one issue is it is static. So you've got a single key which is there for all users. So what happens when you put out your pre-shared key, your user installs it, at some point in the future, they either leave the company or they'll lose their device. Now you've got to revoke that entire pre-shared key, redistribute to all your users a brand new pre-shared key to secure their traffic. So it is not fantastically practical in terms of maintaining for an enterprise organization. Quite often I find that companies, someone leaves, they don't even change their pre-shared key. Another issue with WPA2 Personal is that, again, it's a single static pre-shared key. So what happens is users now, they all share the same profile, which means they all have the same VLAN ID, they all have the same firewall policies. There's no way of identifying different users and different user groups on your network. What that means is, of course, is that you have no differentiation. You can't control things very easily. And yeah, okay. Another option that's out there, of course, is WPA2 Enterprise. We're using 802.1x authentication, and this is a fantastic method, very secure, still very secure. WPA2 is still secure, even though we got WPA3 out there now. WPA2 is still very secure. It's still very useful, widely used. Great thing is, of course, every user gets unique credentials. If they leave, they're authenticated against Active Directory. Someone leaves the company, you just go into Active Directory, you delete them out of the Active Directory, and boom, they're gone, no longer access to your network. We can also, depending on Active Directory groups through Radius, push out credentials, user profiles, which allows us to assign those users to different VLANs. So you can have one group of users on VLAN 10 with a firewall policy, etc. And it gives you the ability to segment them depending on their radius attributes, just based on radius attributes. Now, of course, one of the complications with 802, and this is very widely deployed, most of the enterprises I visit have WPA2 Enterprise installed, of course, but it is complex to set up. You do need certificates. You need some method of managing those certificates, so some kind of PKI infrastructure in the background to actually manage those. It can be difficult to deploy and troubleshoot. Also, if you're dealing with things like guest access, you don't want to put those in your Active Directory, and IoT devices. How do you manage those? They don't necessarily, you don't want to put all those. You could do MAC authentication against Active Directory or against Radius, but it gets complicated actually managing those individual devices. And that comes to, okay, an option that Extreme provides you came in through ErrorHive acquisition, and that's private pre-shared keys. Private pre-shared keys kind of draws on a couple of those: simplicity of pre-shared keys with the ability to segment user traffic into different groups. You can actually give every single user on your network a different pre-shared key and still have them authenticate to the same SSID. So it makes each one of those is an isolated. And if a user leaves the company, or if they lose their device, it's quite easy. Just go in, revoke that personal or private pre-shared key, and boom, that's no longer a problem on your network. But all the other network users who have different pre-shared keys can actually still access the network. You can also segment those users into now, because of the pre-shared key, you can identify those end users. It gives you the ability to assign them to different user profiles in the network. And those user profiles can now be assigned to different VLANs. They can have different firewall rules associated with them, and you can segment those users up quite strongly. We even have a method to do segment, even control even further, micro segmentation of users in there as well. So one of the cost benefits is easy to deploy, no need for those certificate authorities. You can make them time-based, and it really solves that problem of static pre-shared keys in your network. So how we use them? Some of the use cases are guest access. You can actually, of course, quite often you come in and you say, oh, well, here's your pre-shared key. It actually gives you the ability to actually, this is not a radius authenticated user access. This is actually a separate pre-shared key for each user. So it actually gives them unique credentials where each one can be time-based, and it can control how long that user comes on your network, when they can access, and you can actually, everyone is segmented using their own personal pre-shared key. Or you can give them a group of, allow them to say, connect 3 devices on that same key if you like. BYOD obviously is an issue. Again, you can actually give your internal people pre-shared key for BYO devices. IoT, you can actually either give each individual device its own pre-shared key, or you can say, I'll cut you one example you'll see me build here is, say, for CCTV cameras. You could say, okay, I have 12 cameras in my network. I'm going to give each of them a pre-shared key, or I can give security just one pre-shared key, which actually goes to all of those cameras. So it actually allows you to vary a lot of flexibility of the way that you use these things. Obviously, with secure guest access, there's various ways of providing them. Obviously, you go into coffee shops or whatever, there's bad guys lurking there. It's a form of guest access. And we'll look at how you manage that later and how you manage those pre-shared keys and methods of doing that. What we allow you to do is actually the system allows you to actually, as a user authenticates and comes on the network, or a guest comes in, you can actually either have someone print these out, or you can email, SMS, whatever. You can do self-service kiosks. We'll look at that, and actually send them their access information. So in this case, they get their access key. It's good for 24 hours. You can even do things like employee sponsorship if you need on those as well. And that's when you're using for guest access. So one question on this is, where do we store these pre-shared keys? You could, in theory, we have school boards where every single child, every kid in the school board gets their own pre-shared key. And that's good maybe for 2 or 3 devices, but that could be thousands, if not tens of thousands of pre-shared keys. And you can actually do that. The system will allow you to do that and build that. Question is, where do you store them in the network? And actually, there's 2 places that we can store these pre-shared keys. One is locally on the access point itself. And the second one, which I'll look at, is in the cloud. And we can actually build them into cloud. So if we look at this first one, when we say local on the Extreme device, we actually create them in XIQ. We then push all of these pre-shared keys out the access points. The access points can actually store up to 10,000. Now, those are actually in groups of 1,000 per user group, but up to 10,000 pre-shared keys and a single access point, or across an area. Each access point will actually store those. And those are available then when you use this command. Now, as I did mention, you would actually build these in the cloud, but when we store them locally, they have to be pushed. Now, if you're doing this and you're actually saying, you know what, I'm doing guest access, well, and say a receptionist actually generates a key. Every time she generates a new key, she'd have to push the APs, and that might not be practical, especially if you are generating in the order of thousands of pre-shared keys. That would be take a long time to push that update, and you'd be doing it on a regular basis. And so it might not be that useful in terms of something like guest access. So where would you use it? Some of the places you would look at is on, if you've got places where you need survivability. So perhaps your local wide area access, your internet access, or whatever you have is not very, it's flaky, it goes down, but devices you need people to be able to access, then you want those pre-shared keys to be local. Especially if something like if you're doing IoT devices, those obviously you might there's going to be maybe a handful of those, either one key for all your, say, CCTV cameras, or even if you have 15 devices or 100 devices, you could actually push those out. They're not going to change that much, and that would be a good use for it. VIP users, so ones people who have to get access, they can't tolerate not being able to get on, then those you could actually make those. Critical devices in manufacturing or maybe in warehousing, you might want to push those out and have those stored locally on your devices. And smaller sites would be practice. For personal devices and guest access, you could do it, you probably wouldn't. Okay. The second system that we have is actually to store them in the cloud. Now, the cloud is technically unlimited. Literally, these credentials are accessed in the cloud. A device connects the access point. The access point then uses RADSEC to go out to the cloud and say, hey, I have this user accessing the network. Do you have his credentials? The cloud responds back and says, yep, here they are. The access point then basically authenticates that user into the network and gives them access. It does mean that you've got to have that access link. The WAN access has to be up. It is encrypted, so it is secure. You do need to actually open up, though, that port 2083. So there's an additional port that needs to be opened on your firewall policy just to allow RADSEC to work. Now, obviously, if you have hundreds of access points, you may have several hundred access points in your network. You don't necessarily want all of them trying to get out the cloud to authenticate end users. Plus, every time a user roams, the next access point has to know about that as well. And what we do is we have a system called RADSEC proxies. So the system elects two proxy RADSEC proxies on the network, and it's basically two access points which act as that RADSEC proxy. And those actually then service requests from all the other access points, so they know where the RADSEC proxies are. If a user is trying to get on the network, they will actually then, the access point, they'll go to the local access point. The local access point will go to the RADSEC proxy, who then will actually call out the cloud. Okay, so this is how it works. As I said, client starts the PPSK session, calls his local access point. That one actually goes to RADSEC proxy. He goes out the cloud and actually queries the cloud server. Do I actually have credentials? Cloud server comes back. Yes, I have them. Here you go. Here's your credential. The RADSEC proxy, another thing that he does is then distribute those to all of the local access points. So if a client is roaming around the building, those credentials are all pre-cached within those access points and ready to go, so he can roam seamlessly through the environment without getting kicked off. It then completes the four-way handshake to actually complete that session. That's actually one common question. I meant to put it in here, but you can actually see if you go into your list of devices, there is a little icon, a little blue icon next to a couple of the access points, and you'll see if you hover over it that means those are the elected RADSEC proxies in your network. And then the final thing will push down the encryption keys to allow unicast and broadcast. And then the device is able to join the network. Okay, of course that all takes seconds to accomplish. So that's the other way, the two ways. And which one you decide on, local or cloud. Cloud is better if you're doing things like guest access and you're creating pre-shared keys, PPSK keys on the fly, and you want those users to get, then that's the ideal way of doing it. Store them in the cloud, and that way they're ready. You don't have to push out the network. If you've got IoT devices, things like that, which need them to be available all the time, then it's worth storing them local. And I'll show you in the configuration how to do that. So how do we manage them? As I said, you could have thousands of pre-shared keys in your network, and that's a lot of pre-shared keys to manage. And there are a couple of bells and tweaks I'll point out along the way, which allow you to do that. One obvious way is, and you'll probably do this initially when you're configuring the system, certainly the lab that I'll show you today, you'll see this take place. You can actually, obviously, you're the admin user, you can go in there and you can create users. If you look and pull up your configuration window, you actually see one option is user management. You can create users and actually generate them. You probably don't want to, as the network admins, you don't want to be every time someone comes in your office, be responsible for doing that. So another way is actually a guest management. One role we give you, if you look down, you create a admin user in your network, is this one called guest management. And it gives you the ability, say, for a receptionist or an administrator in your organization to actually go in, and all they have access to, under the distribution groups here, we've actually given them access just to my contractor user group here. So all they have access to, this user, only when they log into the cloud interface, all they see is the ability to generate users for this contractor user group. So it's sort of a guest access. And that's one way of doing it. You could assign that portal then to a receptionist or some admin person just to do that for you. Again, that if you're creating thousands of them, is that practical? Another way of doing guest access is to you can actually use an open guest portal. Now this would actually does require setting up an open SSID, but that is only used for self-registration of users. There is one way of doing it. I won't be going through this today. You can set up an open SSID. It actually then provides a guest portal, and that guest portal allows you the ability for a guest to actually register on your network. They can do things like sponsored guest access from someone in your organization to do this. And then that actually gives them what happens then is we email them or text them a pre-shared key with instructions how to reconnect to the network, what SSID to use, and then they get that secure guest access. It's another way of doing it. Again, though, is that practical for thousands of users? For large users, the most useful way that they have, and we have customers that do this, is actually what we call through the identity API. As you know, XIQ is API driven, and there are what we call there's this thing called an identity API, and that allows you to customize, to build your own customized applications to manage these PPSK credentials. So you can actually, through Python or whatever, build a little application where people can actually then generate pre-shared keys. We have actually one which allows you to sync PPSKs to Active Directory. There's one that's already pre-built. If you go into GitHub, you'll actually be able to see that one, download it, see what it does. There are others which actually allow you to actually generate these pre-shared keys. One that's out there, and I just came across the guy's business card today, is actually one company, and it's actually called PPSK Kiosk.com. If you go there, you can actually see this and actually inquire about it. It's actually a pre-built kiosk, and you can actually take these, place them in your reception area. It's just an iPad. It's a special frame with an iPad built in, with the software which basically talks to XIQ through your identity API, allows guests to, when you walk into the reception, hit the screen, generate their own PPSK and get secure access. Or you could put these in a coffee shop or in any lobby area for a large organization where if you've got guests coming in, they can generate their own PPSKs. And that's another way of doing it. Okay. So the next thing we're going to look at is I'm going to be going into a lab. So I'm actually just going to switch screens here. You give me a second. Just make sure that and as I said, part of this, where I've actually said lab here, I do actually have in here all the slides, all the detailed instructions to do what I'm going to be doing now. So I'm going to actually switch over to, this is my own personal XIQ account. And I've already created in here a network profile for what we call PPSK demo. And you can, it's very easy to create, just add network profile, give it a name. You noticed I haven't added any SSIDs yet to this. And I'm going to go through and actually show you how do you actually create an SSID with PPSK. You notice I've actually selected just wireless on this one. When I go to wireless networks, you actually see I have no SSIDs here right now. So I'm actually going to create one here. I'm actually going to go in, I'm actually going to call it PPSK-demo. And it will actually copy over. And I actually just make this on 5 gigahertz. By default, you'll actually notice that PPSK, private pre-shared keys, is already selected. You've got all the other options here. You might actually go in, enterprise might be selected, but you can actually, as you create it, this is the default setting, and it will automatically default to that. And that means it's actually setting it up for private pre-shared keys. Some of the options that you'll see here, I can actually, at the very beginning, set my maximum number of clients that are on my network. Now, this does, as we get into other configuration, building user groups, this can be overridden. At the moment, it's set to no limit or unlimited. There is a separate setting under the user groups where I can set this separately. Okay. I'm not going to set it today. I'm not going to make use of this global setting. I'm going to set it under the user groups. One thing you can do, you can actually bind the MAC addresses to private pre-shared keys and set the numbers that you can actually use. Again, I'm going to just leave it as a default, which is 1. Private client groups, this is used with the AP302W. If you're a college or university, say, and you have dorm rooms, this allows you to micro-segment users. So you can have each, if you had an AP302 in each room, you can actually not just give each student then a private pre-shared key so they can access with their devices on the network. You can even give them their own private wired port. So you could designate you've got 2 or 3 students in a room. Each one of them could have a separate port on the 302 that they can plug in a wired printer or something like that if they wanted to as well. I'm not going to look at the use classification options today. One thing we will do just quickly, and I'm not going to go into detail, that one of these users is I'm going to enable the captive portal on these. Okay. I'm actually going to, one of the things is a contractor PPSK, and for those ones, I want to be able to give them a terms and conditions portal. So as they log in, they're just going to get a bunch of terms and conditions, and that's going to be delivered through a captive web portal. So I've selected that. I'm not going to go into detail on how to configure that. Maybe that's another session we'll look at, is the internal captive web portals. I'm going to be looking at eGuest next week, but I'm not going to cover that in detail today. So I'm just going to select the one. You can actually just add if you like and select the default captive portal is fine. And this is then when we start getting into how do we actually build. PPSKs are built through this thing called user groups. Okay. Now, for sake of time, I said I only had an hour, and I didn't want to go into too much detail as I already pre-built them. So normally you would hit a plus symbol. In fact, the instructions I gave you will actually instruct you to hit add, and then you will basically go in and add one. I'm going to actually pre-select a couple that I've already got built. I've got one here for my CCTV user groups. I'll select that. I will go in and show you what I've got configured here. So as I said, as you saw before, This is where I'm going to give it a name. This is typically when you're going through the configuration. You're going to define this here, gives you the ability to define whether it's local, i.e. on my access points, or if you pull it down, you actually see it says cloud, and I can actually then place it in the cloud. So these will be stored in the cloud. As I said before, I can set the maximum number of clients. This overrides that global setting that we said before. In this case, this has been designed for CCTV cameras in my environment. So what I've said is, okay, I know there's 12 cameras, and I'm going to apply those in there. So I've defined this as 12 only. I don't need any more. Next part you're going to look at is password settings. This deals with your password complexity. So you actually got various options. I can do letters, numbers, or special characters. And I can enforce that. Basically, all of these character types must. So when you generate a PPSK, it's going to include all of those components. Now, this is my CCTV cameras don't accept special characters. So what I've done is just left letters and numbers and selected that. And I said I've defined a password length of 12 characters. Expiry is never going to expire. These things are going to be on all the time, but they will re-authenticate after about every 30 minutes just to say they're alive. And I said, in terms of delivering this, so once I've generated the PPSK, how do I deliver this? As I said, you can deliver it either through text messages, and you'll actually see I'm going to build options where we do that, or you can email it. And the final step of this is users. Now, I do have there's two options here. I've already built a security admin, and you can actually just do plus here, and I can actually say my security admin. Administrator. I can actually give them an email address. Then I generate my password. I can show my password. You see here, this goes, we selected for CCTV. We only said letters and numbers. So that's exactly what it is. There's no special characters on here. Then I would actually define my delivery option. And here I would actually, if I type in here, secure at XYZ Court. Okay, then I actually select this. You notice that. So this user is actually, this pre-shared key is going to get sent to that end user. Now I've already added this user, so I'm going to hit cancel. You would actually normally hit done. And one thing I want to show you here as well, you do have the ability, I mentioned earlier that you've got 12 CCTV cameras on here. You can actually bulk create. So if I hit bulk create now, I add a prefix, CTV dash, and then I actually add a number of my accounts. So again, I'll say 12, and then who do I, again, I would put security at xyzcorp.com, and basically this would actually generate a list of PPSKs, 12 PPSKs. So then that would get emailed out in I think it's a comma separated a CSV file that gets sent out, so the person can pull it up and say, okay, each camera gets their own PPSK, and that's actually attached to this user group. Okay, I'll cancel out of that. As I say, I already added a user to this just for the sake of time. And then you just hit save. Once you've done that, you'll actually see that show up here. I'm going to select a separate one here as well. I'm going to put up by IoT user group. This one's a little bit different, but not much. This time, again, I've set letters and numbers. I've defined that. This time I'm going to email it, and I've added a user as well. So it's actually very similar to the first one. We'll actually do some differentiation later just to show you how that works. Third one that I've added, this one is actually, these are local users. I'm going to go to my cloud, and I've actually built one which is contractor. Again, you would hit plus and then build this yourself, is how this works. If I go into the contractor one, this one's a little bit different. I've added this one. Notice I've tagged here that we will enable the captive web portal registration. And we've mentioned we were going to use that before. Few different things here. This user is able to use special characters. For the expiration, instead of saying that it never expires, I've actually said this is valid for a time period. So this particular PPSK is only good for 24 hours after the first login. So it must be used within 2 days. If it's not used within 2 days, it will no longer be available. If he uses it, say, after 1 day, then he gets 24 hours. Then he gets basically what happens then. And this is one thing to be aware of, is how when you're managing these, you create them in a database. They will stay in that database basically forever if you don't delete them. So there is some sort of cleanup that you need to do for the in order to take care of these PPSKs. You obviously don't want you just keep adding thousands of PPSKs into your database. So you can actually say, you know, what happens when when this user finishes his 24-hour time period? Well, in this case, I flagged him that he gets sent to a little web portal, and that gives him the ability to self-renew these credentials. Here's a contractor I know is on my site. What happens if he doesn't renew? Well, I've said delete the credentials. I've actually made a mistake here. I meant to say 3 days, but I've said it's 3 minutes. And once it's set, it's one of those things, once I've saved it, doesn't let me change it. But normally I would set this some like 3 days. So after 3 days, it goes out and removes that from my database, so that, you know, it doesn't sit there forever. And actually, once it does expire, I've actually said I'm going to show him the message just saying, hey, your credentials have expired. I've actually said this one, I'll text an email, but notice here that I've no users. The reason no users are, this is basically a guest access, and I'm going to go out later and actually create those users, maybe through that administration portal, that guest access portal, or through some other means. I'm not going to add them in yet. I'm going to do it through through a different mechanism. And then basically I would save again. I'm going to hit cancel because I've already got them saved. Okay, so that's basically defined my PPSK user groups. So this actually defined each individual group of users. I could add additional ones. I think I can add up to 64 different user groups, different types of users in there. Now we're going to tie those. If you've built the XIQ profiles before, you'll know that we actually add a lot of people just use the default or apply a different user profile to each client or user groups. So this is now where I actually start to customize what do I do with these users, different groups of users. And again, I would hit plus and I would build these. I've already got them defined, so I'm actually going to select. I'll do them one at a time. So in this one, for the CTV cameras that we said earlier, here I've actually said, okay, I've actually defined a separate VLAN 130. I can just add, and then it allows me to add a VLAN if I want to, or I can just go in and select from a list of VLANs that I've already got selected. And this is actually CCTV VLAN 130. Good practice to actually put the VLAN ID in the actual name, so you know which VLAN it is. And so I know this is going to VLAN 130. And it gives me other options down here. One of the things I've done with this is said, okay, these are CCTV cameras. What do they need to act? Well, I've given them access to DHCP server. I've actually given them access to DNS. Then I've actually given them just firewall rules. There's like 3 or 4, there's 3 different protocols, services that they need, TCP profiles, and I've had to give them access to those, but only to my my video recording server. So they can actually go off to my video recorder and actually upload video, and actually my management is there as well. And I've just allowed them that. But I've denied them access to everything else in my network or outside my network. So if someone does manage, there's been things where people have hacked into cameras and then use that to launch attacks into the internal network. Well, no telnet, no SSH allowed out of these. They're locked down. Only place they can go is to my server, and only on a limited number of TCP ports, enough so they can function and do their job. Okay. Other things you can do in here, if you haven't configured these before, I can actually tunnel traffic to maybe to a DMZ, so I can actually set up a tunnel and actually send that traffic off. I can allow build quality of service profiles, availability schedules. So maybe these are only available 6 hours a day. CCTV cameras, you probably want them on 24, so I'm not going to set anything like that. I can set SLAs, which gives me the ability to say, you know, that these are available. How much guaranteed bandwidth they get on the wireless network, and then date and time. So this is literally how much total time they get access. They only get an access to a total of 24 hours, but they're spread over a week. And maybe I only allow them to upload 3 gigabytes of data and then they cut off. So those kind of restrictions in there as well. Once I've set up all my user profile details, I will then actually save user profile. I've already built it, so I'm going to cancel there and save that. And then I'm going to add a second one. And I'm actually going to set up my IoT devices. Let's add my IoT devices in there. And I've done very similar here. Again, I've defined a separate VLAN, my IoT VLAN 110. This case, what I've done is said they get access to an IoT server on the internet somewhere, and I permit that, but I not deny access to anything else. I've given them DHCP DNS, which allows them to get out to that server. Again, the idea being to lock these devices down. If someone does hack them, they're firewalled, they're protected. The only thing they can do is get out to the IoT interface out in the cloud somewhere. So I've locked those down. Everything else, again, they're on 24 hours a day. I've left them as is. So save that. And the third one, which is a little bit different, but not much, is I've actually set up my contractor user profile. Contractors go into VLAN 120 in here. Now, one thing when you're doing, again, I've set up security on these. In this case, I have actually, if you actually click this little pull down here, you actually find that you can actually, there are pre-defined, if you define your own firewall rules. And I've actually selected this one here, which is a pre-canned one. When you turn on XIQ, you should all have this one defined, and it's guest internal access only, internet access only. So it's designed. If you look what it is, it denies access to any of your .10, 172, 192 networks, but permits access outbound to the internet. So even though I've put them on a separate VLAN, and hopefully that VLAN is only restricted, goes out to my external firewall and then out to the internet, I've actually protected my internal networks even further by preventing access. They can't even try and go to those networks. Okay, this one, what you might want to do is actually provide an availability schedule. So you could actually go in here, say here, and say, you know what, it's going to start on Monday, and it's going to go to Friday, it's 27th, and it's going to be there from 6 a.m. To 6 p.m. All right, so I've given them basically coverage in Office, and I've saved my schedule there as well. Oh, I didn't give them a name for my schedule, Workday. Save schedule. So now that's actually been saved, and I've got my contractor profile saved. I'm actually going to hit cancel on that because I've already got that built. So now I've got my user groups, which are my PPSK definitions, and I've got my user profile, which define what those users can do when they come on the network. But the next thing I need to do is tie the two together. So I want to tie together this one, let's say my CCTV user group, and that PPSK group to my CCTV user profile, and tie the two. And that's done using these things here called assignment rules. And I can actually add a brand new one, and I then just give it a name, just say CCTV. I like to actually say that this is an assignment rule, is what I do. And I then, when you hit the plus sign here, you'll see this one down. There's different things you can add, but then you'll see this one that comes up says user group. And that's referring to the user groups that we created above there. So you can actually select that and then just say select. I've actually already built these because I know they work. So I'm going to actually select my CCTV assignment rule and just say link. Once you've got that, you'll actually see it pops up down here. I can actually come here, show it, and I can actually see exactly what it's allowing. So this CCTV user profile is linked to my assignment rule to my user group. And I've actually tied those two together. I can do the same for my, these are my IoT users. So if I go here, select link, and again, just double check that is what I expected it to be. And that's my user group 2, which is up here, is already defined. And now my contractor 1. And here I actually go in there, I've got an AR, link that one. And those are actually now linked together. I can view that again, just to make sure it is what I wanted. Now, each of these, what I've done is actually link all those together. All I now need to do is say save, and it will actually, it fell for some reason. Global ID, object ID cannot be empty. And I've set something somewhere that's empty. I don't know where that is. But if I normally hit save, it should save. Basically, I've been playing around with this, so I've already created a number of things, and it's got something in there which it doesn't like. I've actually created it, deleted it a number of occasions. So I've already, I know for a fact that one of my user groups is actually a ghost one. That's why I've called this one 2, but don't know why that one is. That's a brand new bug. But normally you say save, and that should actually then place you in that. Basically will save the SSID and actually allow you then, as these user groups, the using those PPSKs, connect to that SSID. And actually, as they connect to the SSID, they will be able to make use of that, basically get the access that you've defined under the user profile. Okay. So that's basically what I have for you today. I think that's good. We kept it under 45 minutes, and we actually, let's see if we've got some questions and answers here. Says QR code. Did we get an answer to that one? What's that reference to? Oh, let me clarify. Yeah, good question. I know you can actually generate a QR code for that without, if you, the one that we normally generate for a coffee shop or something like that, just gives them access to a global PSK. Not sure if you'd want to do that with a PPSK. Typically, we want to send those PPSKs out to a you email them out or text them out so they actually get it, and then they literally just click on the link, and that will actually allow them to answer the network. With a kiosk, I don't know if the kiosk does that. It is something that's potentially possible. The kiosk obviously is predefined. We don't actually sell that kiosk. It is sold through a third party that's built that application and actually sells it on our behalf. As I say, that if you go to ppsk-kiosk.com, you can actually see that there. How long will passwords be cached for? That's a good question. I think it's something like 24 hours. They will actually be cached in. So once the RadSec proxy they pulled down, they do time out, and I think it's like 24 hours. But obviously, if a user logs in again, that will get refreshed, and they will actually basically be there, be refreshed in the locally. Okay. So I think that covers all of my questions.